Hey guys, today we are going to read the book When Calls Are Hard by Janette Oke, and it has total of 36 chapters, starting with the chapter 1, Elizabeth. It came as a great surprise to me. Oh, not the letter itself. We were all used to the arrival of letters from Brother Jonathan. They came quite regularly and always caused a small stir in the household. No, it wasn't the letter, but rather what it contained that caught me completely off guard, and Mother's response to it was even more astounding. The day April 12, 1910 had started out like every other day. I arose early, had a quiet prayer time in my room, cared for my grooming, breakfasted with the family, and left at 8 to walk the 11 blocks to the school where I taught. I had made it a habit to be there early so that I would have plenty of time to make my morning preparations before the students arrived. I was usually the first teacher to make an appearance, but I rather enjoyed the early morning quietness of otherwise noisy building. As I walked along that delightful spring morning, the world appeared especially beautiful and alive. For some reason, the flower scented air and the song of the birds caused me to take a rare look at my inner self. And how are you this delightful spring morning? I asked myself. Why, I am just fine, thank you, I silently answered, and then almost blushed as I quickly looked around for fear that someone might be able to read my thoughts. It wasn't like me to talk to myself even inwardly, especially when walking along this public, maple sheltered street, but no one shared the sidewalk with me at the moment, so the self dialogue continued. Are you now? And what is it that makes your day so glorious? Your step so feather light, the morning like itself, the very fragrance of the air I breathe. 'Tis nice, but then you have always been a soul who took pleasure in just being alive. I do declare that you would be happy and contented anywhere on God's green earth. No, not really, not really. The sudden turn of the conversation and the switch of my motion surprised me. There was a strange and unfamiliar stirring deep within me. A restlessness was there, begging me to give it proper notice. I tried to push it back into a recessed corner of my being, but it elbowed its way forward. You're always doing that, it hotly declared. Whenever I tried to raise my head, you push me down, shove me back. Why are you so afraid to confront me? Afraid? Yes, afraid. I'm not afraid. It's just that I believe. I've been taught that one ought to be content with what one has, especially one has been as blessed as I. It is a shame, no, a sin, to feel discontented while enjoying all of the good things that life and Papa have showered upon me. Aye, it wouldn't be a sin to disregard one's blessing. I should never wish you to do so, but perhaps, just perhaps, it would quiet your soul if you would look fairly and squarely at what makes the empty little longing tug at you now and then. It was a challenge, and though I still felt fearful and perhaps not a little guilty, I decided that I must take a look at this inner longing if the voice was ever to be still. I was born Elizabeth Mary Thatcher on June 3, 1891, the third daughter to Ephraim and Elizabeth Thatcher. My father was a merchantman in the city of Toronto and had done very well for himself and his family. In fact, we were considered part of the upper class, and I was used to all of the material benefit that came with such a situation. My father's marriage to my mother was a second one for her. She had first been married to a captain in the king's service. To this union had been born a son, my half brother Jonathan. Mother's first husband had been killed when Jonathan was but 3 years old. Mother, therefore, had returned to her own father's house, bringing her small son with her. My father met my mother at a Christmas dinner given by mutual friends. She had just officially come out of mourning. Though she found it difficult to wrap up her grief and lay it aside with her mourning garments, I often wondered just what appealed most to my father, the beauty of the young widow or her obvious need for someone to love and care for her. At any rate, he would and want her, and then were married the following November. The next year, my oldest sister Margaret was born. Ruthie then followed 2 years later. Mother lost a baby boy between Ruthie and me, and it nearly broke her heart. I think now that she was disappointed that I wasn't a son, but for some reason I was the one whom she chose to bear her name. Julie arrived 2 years after me. Then, 2.5 years later, much to mother's delight, another son was born, a baby brother Matthew. I can't blame mother for spoiling Matthew, for I know full well that we shared it equally. For the time that he arrived, we all pampered and fused over him. Our home lacked nothing. Papa provided well for us, and mother spent hours making sure that her girls would grow into ladies. Together, my parents assumed the responsibility for our spiritual nurturing, and within the proper boundaries, we were encouraged to be ourselves. Margaret was the nesting one of the family. She married at 18 and was perfectly content to give herself completely to making a happy home for her salt-stir husband and their little family. Ruth was a musical one, and she was encouraged to develop her talent as a pianist under the tutorship of the finest teachers available. When she met a young and promising violinist in New York and decided that she would rather be his accompanist than a soloist, my parents gave her their blessing. I was known as the practical one, the one who could always be counted on. It was I whom mother called if I ever there was a calamity or problem when papa wasn't home, relying on what she referred to as my cool head and quiet thinking. Even at an early age, I knew that she often depended upon me. I guess it was my practical side that made me prepare for independence, and with that in mind, I took my training to be a teacher. I knew mother thought that a lady attractive and pleasant as she had raised me to be, had no need for a career. After all, a suitable marriage was available by just nodding my pretty head at some suitor. But she held her tongue and even encouraged me in my pursuit. I loved children and entered the classroom with confidence and pleasure. I enjoyed my third graders immensely. My sister Julie was a flighty one, the adventure seeker, the romantic. I love her dearly, but I often despaired of her silliness. She was dainty and pretty, so she had no trouble getting plenty of male attention, but somehow it never seemed to be enough for her. I prayed daily for Julie. Matthew, I suppose that I was the only one in the family to feel at least very often concerned for Matthew. I could see what we all had done to him without spoiling, and I wondered if we had gone too far. Now a teenager, he was too dear to be made to suffer because of the over-attention of a careless family. He and I often had little private times together when I tried to explain to him the responsibilities of the adult world. At first, I felt that my subtle approach was beyond his understanding, but then I began to see a consciousness of the meaning of my words breaking through. He became less demanding and began to assert himself in the proper sense, to stand independently. I nurtured hope that we hadn't ruined him after all. He was showing a strength of character that manifested itself in love and concern for others. Our Matt was going to make something of himself in spite of us. My morning reverie was interrupted by the particularly sweet song of a robin. He seemed so happy as he perched on a limb high over my head, and my heart broke away from its review of my family to sing its own little song to accompany him. Well, I thought, when our song had ended, the restlessness does not come because I do not appreciate the benefits that God has given me, nor does it come because I do not love my family. Some of the feeling of guilt began to drain away from me. I felt much better having honestly discovered this fact. So, I went on. Why am I feeling restless? What is wrong with me? Nothing is wrong, the inner me replied. As you said, you are not unappreciative nor uncaring. Yes, it is true that you are restless. That does not prove that you are lacking. It is just time to move on, that's all. To move on? I was incredulous, as if the answer had come from a total stranger. Certainly. What do you think brings the robin back each spring? It is not that he no longer has his nest or his food supply. He just knows that it is time to move on. But to move on, where? How? You will know when the time comes, but I am not sure that I want. Hush. I had never even considered moving on before. I was very much a home person. I wasn't even especially taken with the idea of marriage. Oh, I suppose that somewhere, someday, there would be someone, but I certainly had no intention of going out looking for him. Nor had I been very impressed with any of the young men who had come looking for me. On more than one occasion, I had excused myself and happily turned them over to Julie. She also seemed pleased with the arrangement, but the feelings of the young man involved, I must shamefully confess, concerned me very little. And now I was to move on. The uneasiness within me changed to a new feeling, fear. Being a practical person and knowing full well that I wasn't prepared to deal with these new attitudes at the present, I pushed them out of my mind, entered the serrated brick school building and my third grade classroom, and deliberately set myself to concentrating on the spelling exercise for the first class of the morning. Robert Ackley was still having problems. I had tried everything that I knew to help him. What could I possibly try next? I went through the entire day with a seriousness and intent unfamiliar to me. Never before had I put myself so totally into my lessons to make them interesting and understandable. At the end of the day, I was exhausted, so I decided to clean the blackboards and go home. Usually, I spend an hour or so in preparation for the next day's lessons, but I just didn't feel up to it this time. I hurriedly dusted off the eraser, shoved some lessons books into my bag, securely fastened the classroom door behind me, and left the three-story building. The walk home refreshed me somewhat. I even saw the robin with whom I had sung a duet in the morning. I felt more like myself as I climbed our front steps and let myself in. Mother was in the small sunroom pouring tea that Martha, our maid, had brought. She didn't even seem surprised to see me home early. Lay aside your hat and join me, she called. I detected excitement in her voice. I placed my light shawl and hat on the hall table and took a chair opposite Mother. I felt I could use a cup of strong hot tea. I got a letter from Jonathan, Mother announced as she handed me my cup. I assumed then that her excitement was due to Jonathan's letter or the news that it contained. Jonathan was still special to Mother, being her firstborn and only child from her first marriage. He was also her first love in many ways. Julie had on occasion suggested Mother loved Jonathan more than the rest of us. I tried to convince Julie that Mother did not love him more, just differently. I often thought how difficult it must have been for her to give him up, to let him go. Jonathan had been just 19 when he decided that he must go west. I was only 4 years old at the time and too young to really understand it all, but I had been aware that after he left that something was different about her home, about Mother, though she tried hard not to let it affect the rest of us. 3 months after Jonathan had left, baby Matthew had arrived, and Mother's world had taken on new meaning. Yet not even Matt had taken Jonathan's place in her heart, and now Mother sat opposite to me, calmly serving tea, though I could tell that she felt anything but calm. Whatever the news in Jonathan's letter, I sensed that Mother was excited rather than concerned, so her tenseness did not frighten me. How is he? I asked, choosing to let Mother pick her own time and words for revealing her excitement. Oh, just fine. The family is well. Mary is feeling fine. She is due soon now. Jonathan's lumber business is growing. He had to hire another clerk last month. It all sounded good. I was happy for this older brother whom I barely remembered. Yet somehow I felt that Mother's present mood did not stem from any of the facts that she had so hurriedly stated. I mumbled a polite response about being glad for Jonathan's good fortune and sipped my tea. I did wish that Mother would get to the point. Mother didn't even lift her cup. Instead, she reached into the bosom of her gown and removed Jonathan's recent letter. We were all used to her doing that. Whenever a letter from Jonathan arrived, she would read it through a number of times and then tuck it in the front of her dress. She carried it around with her for days and would pull it forth and reread it whenever time allowed. She carefully unfolded it now, but rather than pass it to me as she normally did, she began to hurriedly read aloud. She passed quickly through Jonathan's greeting as though she was anxious to get to the real heart of the letter. As I continued to sip my tea, I could hear the excitement growing in her voice. She suddenly slowed down, and I knew that she's and I knew that she intended for me to hear and understand every word. There is no end to opportunities here in the West. I know several men who came out with nothing and who now have great homes and flourishing businesses. All that one needed determination, stamina, and a bit of horse sense. Surely mother isn't contemplating urging Papa to move west was a foolish thought that popped into my mind. Mother read on. I have given a great deal of thought to my family lately. It would be so good to have one of my own here. I miss you all so much, especially you, mother, but you know that it's easy to think of the West as a man's land, and so it is, but there are plenty of opportunities here for women as well. And I might add that we in the West realize that if we are to grow strong, we need fine young women to make homes for our men and ensure proper families for the future. I must have grimaced some as I thought, what a cold, calculating way to look at a marriage. But mother continued with our interruption. I had missed a few words, so I thought of Elizabeth. Confusing thoughts explored in my mind. Elizabeth? Me? Me what? Is he suggesting that I go bargain hunting for some western shopkeeper or backwoods rancher for a husband? Not me. Never, never. I felt that I would rather die first. The blood had drained from my face as I started to rise from my chair. Never, I whispered to myself, but mother had paid no attention to my soft gasp and hurried on. Teachers are sorely nearer here. Many mothers in country areas still must tutor their children, but these women have little time and no training. We are anxious to change all of that. We want our next generations to be well educated because in the future we hope to pick the leaders of a new province from among our own. You say that Elizabeth is a fine teacher and a sensible young woman, and I am sure that she is. I talked today with the school superintendent whom I know. He is short of teachers and some of those that he does have. He will replace if he could. He says that if Elizabeth is willing to come west, he will gratefully give her a position, and as I said before, it would be so good to have someone from my family here. Stunned, I watched mother's eye continue on down the page, but she was reading silently now. I got the impression that I was temporarily forgotten and that her thoughts were with her beloved son Jonathan somewhere out west. I was glad for those few moments to compose myself before I had to meet her eyes again. Jonathan was actually proposing that I go west. For what? Before he had suggested the teaching opportunities, he had written that they needed young women to ensure proper families. Well, I in no way intended to help them do that. Definitely not. I hoped that mother wouldn't to be hard on Jonathan when she replied to the letter. I knew that he had meant well, though he must have known that our mother would never agree to a daughter of hers on the pretense of teaching, going off to the wilds to find herself a man, even if that isn't Jonathan's intent at all. I reasoned, and he is simply looking for more teachers. I have a perfectly good teaching position right where I am. Mother finished reading Jonathan's rather lengthy letter and again tucked it in her bosom. Her tea had grown cold, but she absently reached for her cup and sipped from it with a faraway look in her eyes. I was on the verge of, look, mother, don't let it upset you. Jonathan meant well, but you need not fear. I have no intention of taking it seriously. When she lifted her eyes from her cup and looked directly at me, I expected a mild reprimand of Jonathan. But instead, she said simply, well, she smiled at me, and I could easily detect eagerness in her voice. I was startled and flustered. Well, I questioned back, wondering just what she meant. I couldn't understand mother's rather extraordinary reaction to Jonathan's prosperous proposal. Is she actually thinking that I would even give the matter consideration? How can she? Surely she must see that it is totally. And then in a flash it came to me. I was to be mother's love offering to Jonathan, his piece of the family present to him over the mile. Somehow, my going west to be with him would bring comfort to my mother's heart. I loved her. She was a dear mother. Never would I wish to hurt her. I didn't dare bluntly blurt out that the whole idea was outlandish and that Jonathan had been foolish even to suggest it. With mother sitting there before me, the well still lingering in her gaze, I couldn't say no. But could I say yes? Definitely not. But I could say maybe, until I had taken time to think this whole thing through, to sort it out in my mind, and to plan some way I could get out of it without hurting my mother. Well, it's such a surprise. I'd never thought of the possibility of leaving, of going. My mind fumbled about for words but found none to still the look of concern creeping into mother's eyes. I willed my confused mind into control and hurried on. It sounds interesting, very interesting. I tried to put some sparkle into my voice, but it was difficult when I could hardly get the words past my tight throat. Mother relaxed somewhat, and her eyes began to shine again. It was a moment before I realized that they were bright with unshed tears. I felt almost panicky. I couldn't disappoint her, at least not at the moment. I tried to swallow away the lump in my throat and forced a smile as I put down the fragile china cup. It's well. I'll do some thinking about it and we'll see. Mother reached out and touched my hand. The tears spilled a bit from her eyes, wetting her dark lashes and dropping onto her cheeks. "Bet," she said, "there is no one whom I would rather send to Jonathan than you." I was touched, but frightened. I swallowed hard again, attempted to another smile, and rose from my chair. After a light kiss on mother's forehead, I excused myself. I had to get away, alone, where I could think. My whole world was spinning around, and I felt that if I didn't soon get control of things, I would end up hurling or somewhere into space. I was willing to consider being Jonathan's love package from home, for mother's sake. Yes, I was even willing to consider teaching out west, but as for marrying some uncut and kept man out of the frontier, there I drew a definite solid line. Never. Later that evening, Papa knocked quietly at my door. I had been trying to read in a bed, a luxury that I normally enjoyed. But somehow Jane Austen's young woman had failed to intrigue me. He walked to my window and stood looking out at the quietness of the city. The street lamps flickered softly against the gathering darkness. I waited for him to speak, but when he said nothing, I laid aside my book, pushed myself up to a sitting position, and asked softly, "You have talked to mother." He cleared his throat and turned from the window. He still didn't speak, just nodded his head. "And what do you think?" I asked, secretly hoping that he would exclaim that the whole idea was outrageous and unthinkable. He didn't. "Well," he said, pulling up a chair beside my bed. "At first it was a bit of a shock, but after I thought it through for a while, I began to understand why your mother was rather excited about the whole thing. I guess it could be an adventure for you, Elizabeth, and it would seem not too risky or one. Then you think I should?" "Consider it. Yes, consider it. Go. Not necessarily. Only you will be able to decide that. You know that you are loved and wanted here, but should you want this new experience, we will not hold you back. I don't know, Papa. It's also so new. I don't know what to think about. Elizabeth, we trust you to make the right decision for you. Your mother and I have agreed to abide by it. Abide by it. Whatever you decide and want it to be what you feel you should do. Your mother, as much as she would love to see you go to Jonathan, does not want you to feel pressure to do so if it's not what you want. She asked me to tell you that, Elizabeth. She is afraid that your loyalty and desire to please her might lead you to go for her sake. That's not enough reason to make such a life-changing decision, Elizabeth. Oh, Papa, right now I'm all butterflies. I never dreamed. Don't hurry, my dear. Such a decision needs Much careful thinking and praying, your mother and I will be standing behind you. Thank you, Papa. He kissed my forehead and squeezed my hand. Whatever you decide, he whispered as he left my room. I didn't pick up Jane Austen's book again. I knew that now for certain I couldn't concentrate on the world. So I pulled the chain to put out the lamp and punched my pillows into what I hoped would be a sleep-inducing position with the covers stuck carefully about me. I settled down for the night. It didn't work. It was a long time until I was able to fall asleep. And the first chapter, Elizabeth got over. The second chapter is the first step, which will be read on the following video. Thank you. Have a nice day.